as a reminder, the public can call in or log on to listen to the board meetings live. Please make sure to speak clearly into the microphones so that people listening online can hear. Presenters and any people testifying, please clearly state your name and position before starting. We'll call this meeting to order. Do we have any public testimony at this time?
Yes, Chair. First testifier is D. Austin.
Good morning, Board. My name is Desiree Austin. It's my first time testifying. Thank you for your time. I'm a middle school teacher at Hawaiʻi Intermediate School with over 10 years experience. I'm also a parent. One child at school is easy, one child at school is a struggle. Adolescents, and I'm speaking directly on the topic of the preference for authentic assessment over standardized testing for the middle school student. Adolescence is the most volatile period of human development. Much of their response to their world is physical and visceral. It is normal for them to have emotional outbursts and inexplicable moments of confusion and fear. It is very challenging for most adolescents to bottle their emotions and thoughts for the 2, 3, or even 4 hours of sitting and gazing, which is required of the standardized testing environment. I've observed normally vivacious and gregarious young people enter the computer lab for their test and leave exhausted and dejected, even if they feel they did well. I've observed students who do not even try to do well because the intensity of the assessment atmosphere pushes them to passively punch buttons so that they are done sooner rather than later. I've had students refuse to take the test, and an administrator had to step in demanding that they do, and I'm sure the test had lost focus for that day. We are no longer creating a hub of learning and excitement, but we are creating bricks of a wall of passivity, not creativity. Schools have lost time for art, industrial art, home economics, time and money for field trips, etc. Standardized testing takes a serious psychic toll on teachers and students alike. It is attempting to put a robotic cone of silence in an attempt to imprison the natural noise of the wonderful age of growing up. It's wrong, and we as middle school educators can only say it is wrong. Adolescents are not small adults. The zigzag course of adolescent development in the brain can be understood if we look at the variance in body development. You can mistake an 8th grader as a high school student, and in the same grade have an 8th grader that looks like they're just out of elementary school, simply based on outward physical features. This mirrors the normal variance of their intellectual development. Educators know this and adjust their assessments and assignments accordingly. Middle school should rightfully be voted the least likely time a child can ever be called standardized. Standardized testing is not reflective of the actual learning that takes place in the classroom. Socioeconomic data is just as good as a predictor of their success in these tests, and this is proven in scientific data that's outside of my report today. The testing environment of today puts a drastic emotional toll on teachers and students. Teachers lose precious weeks of instructional time. We are told to evaluate the results to help our students, but the results are not received until months later, until the students have moved on to another grade or even another school. It is more effective and more timely for our instructional plans to glean information from in-class assessments, observation, such as authentic assessment.
Next testifier is Molly Vincent.
Good morning, Board. My name is Molly Vincent. I'm a preschool special education teacher at Kaumana Elementary School on Big Island. Many of us have had children and grandchildren who have matriculated through the public school system. Do you remember what kind of experience you had at school when you first started? I do. It's very different in the schools currently. When parents want their children tested for special education services, their children at 2.5 years old go through a battery of up to 7 assessments that spans over a 3 to 4 week period for the toddlers. During the testing, many children suffer from performance anxiety, crying, tantruming, hiding behind their parents, running away, or are mute just by refusing to answer questions. In my classroom, I have not been ordered, but my students at 3 years old used to spend about 15 to 20 minutes daily on iPads using the Smarty Ants application. The program assesses them at language arts, particularly alphabet names, sounds, mastery, simple words, and reading comprehension in a series of games. Most of my students have needs with oral communication, and they cannot form the letter sound, let alone understand what is being told them, told them what to do. So they enjoyed playing the games on the Smarty Ants app, and then within 10 to 15 minutes they got tired, they didn't want to play anymore, they took off their headphones, and they just don't want to do it. So they asked me to go back to the centers where they can put together puzzles, build Legos, blocks, paint, create tunnels, towers, cities, become a princess, policeman, a unicorn in the dramatic play center. This is a more suitable approach for teaching preschoolers and other students. I am a proponent for authentic assessment. In our schools, students grades K through 6 spend a considerable amount of classroom time on computers, laptops, iPads, participating in assessments. Smarty Ants, TidBiz, TeenBiz, Achieve 3000, and iReady. Daily, weekly, and they're just tired of doing this. I spoke to a few 5th and 6th graders because I'm a preschool teacher, and they were reluctant to answer my questions. They didn't know what was going on, but after a little coaxing, they told me that they are really afraid of testing because when they press the submit button, they may get less than 75%, which means that they have to retake the test. And it's coming up, the ESSA is coming up, the Smarter Balance Assessment, and they said, all we're going to do is test, and we don't want to go to school anymore. So please help us make the right decision to, teach our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Momi.
Next testifier is Jody Kunimitsu.
Good morning, Vice Chair Bergen and members of the committee. My name is Jody Kunimitsu, and I am a math teacher at Maui High School. I am here to share with you my thoughts on the overemphasis of standardized testing in our public schools. I'm a product of the Hawaii public school system, having attended grades K through 12 on the island of Kauai. In addition to this, 13 of my 14 years of teaching have been in this public school system. Throughout my lifetime, I have seen the shift from educating the whole child to the focus on standards-based education. When I was in school, we were taught that things like respecting others, showing up on time, and participating in class were more important than the grades on our report card or test score. These are not things that we are currently emphasizing in our schools. The main emphasis has been on testing and standards-based grading. In other words, students can be absent the entire quarter, disrespect teachers all day long, refuse to participate in the lessons, but still must be given the opportunity to pass the test. The test, which is the only thing that should be determining their grade. It sounds crazy, but this is the reality of today's classroom. I strongly believe that student achievement can be measured in many different ways. We must learn to value and educate the whole child, not simply focus on grades and test scores. As a math teacher, I see the negative effects of testing on a daily basis. My students' experience with math is this: learn a lesson, take a test. Learn a lesson, take a test. Repeat, repeat, repeat. For a student who struggles with math, it is a recurring nightmare that will not end until they earn their 3rd credit of high school math. As teachers, we try our best to make the lessons interesting and emphasize the learning over the grades. But in the end, they will still need to be assessed on their learning, and for them, that equates to tests and grades. If you are thinking, well, why don't those teachers learn to be more innovative? Here's why. Our students are tested in math every single year until they graduate. What ends up happening in schools or is schools then look at those test scores and try to restructure whatever is happening just to bring the test scores up. Everything centers on test scores. I want all Hawaii Public School graduates to be proud of our system. This won't happen if we are constantly focusing on testing and not focusing on all the other positive ways that our students are achieving success. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jody.
Next testifier is Chris Santamaro.
Good morning. My name is Chris Santamaro. I'm a special education teacher at Kaneohe Elementary School. I'm here to speak to you to urge the DOE to apply for the Authentic Assessment Pilot under ESSA. A few years ago, I was co-teaching a freshman English class at Castle High School. My department had been given the mandated Springboard curriculum to teach, and the co-teacher and I were reluctant to use it, but we knew we should stick with our department's plan. In the first week or so, we decided to spend some time getting to know the students and where they were coming from. This introductory unit blossomed into an amazing first month as the students came to school ready to share about their strife, journaled daily about the community and sense of trust we were building, and took ownership of the discussions we were having on race, class, and traditional schooling. However, after this introduction unit, we were pushed to start using Springboard so we didn't fall behind the rest of the freshman classes and were able to commonly assess our students. I probably don't need to tell you what happened the next few months. It was like pulling teeth in our class. Students felt that we had let them down, stripped them of the ability to look critically at the world around them and discuss topics they cared about. By sticking with Springboard and its promises to support students in their standardized testing, we were robbing them of the authentic learning that they were yearning for. A former colleague of mine sent me a video documenting education author and film producer Ted Dintersmith's visit to Hawaii to see some of the amazing learning happening in our schools. As I watched the video, my heart rose to see all of the innovation happening within our schools, yet sank to realize that out of all the schools profiled, only one was a traditional public school. Why is that? Because our public schools are being strangled by the idea that we need to base our teaching to support standardized test scores, not students. We need to learn from schools in Hawaii using authentic assessments that encourage students to understand and change the world around them for the better. Every time I hear a teacher speak about needing to teach a lesson or drill students on a particular skill because they'll need it for smarter balance, and that happens all the time, I feel sick to my stomach, and I hope you all do too. We need to redefine how we educate children, and embracing authentic, innovative assessments is the first step. I urge the state to apply for the Authentic Assessment Pilot. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Next testifier is Amanda Seymour.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Seymour. I'm a proud special education middle school math teacher at Alimana Middle School. I have 23 students that have an individualized education program. I have a 7th grader that scores on a universal screener at least a 2nd grade level, and I have another student that scores at least a 9th grade equivalency. Even though I have many students that are below grade level, I have to continually build on the foundation. I have many students that don't even know how to add and subtract with decimals, multiply with decimals. Every day I build on the foundation of basic skills. This past week, they've been practicing the interim tests. It's 15, 13, 14 problems. My kids hate it. They tell me they hate math class now. My philosophy in my room, I make math as fun as possible. But when I have to tell them, you have to take this, well, why? Because it's mandated. Because I have to make sure that you understand these questions, that you understand how to do these. So we're going to do something a little different in our classroom. I'm going to present them the questions, and we're going to work them out so I can show them the basics of how to solve them. But what am I doing now? I'm teaching to a test. All of my college career, you do not teach to a test. But in the state of Hawaii and many other states, the #1 criteria of knowing if you're in a good school is you have great scores on your statewide assessment. How does that affect my students? It doesn't. They don't know what the scores mean. They're not going to use this in real life. What I try and teach is basic skills that need in the real world. Quarter one, I created a project that has nothing to do with the state mandated Go math curriculum. They had to keep a checkbook registry. I used that because that was the number system, module 1, positive and negative integers. The kids enjoyed it. The parents enjoyed it because the parents were now able to teach their child something they need to know in real life. Quarter two, I made my students go out and talk to students. They had to create a survey. Nowhere in the Go Math module, which is where I'm at, has anything to do with that. Quarter three, they're going to be getting all the test results from all universal screeners, all diagnostics, so they can see their scores and see how they are growing. That's a project that my kids want to do because they want to get better. Statewide assessment, I show them their scores. They don't know what they mean. I don't know what they mean. I tell them you just do your best. That's all I can ever ask from you. If you get frustrated, take a breath, try again. If you don't know it, take the best educated guess that you can take. So I would like to urge authentic assessments versus a statewide mandated assessment that is above my students' level. They have an IEP, but yet they're mandated to take a grade level assessment. They're mandated to have the grade level curriculum, but they're nowhere near grade level. And I'm proud of them, of their growth and not of their achievements. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Next testifier is Debbie Anderson.
Hello, Vice Chair Patrick and committee. My name is Debbie Anderson. I am a current librarian at YK Intermediate. But when Dr. Jerry Madraza was in charge of the senior project, I wish Maggie were here, she could tell you more. I'm the co-chair, the state co-chair of the senior project. So when I wrote my testimony for you, I had very carefully looked at the criteria that the federal government is going to use to judge which 7 applications will they accept to do the pilot. So I addressed looking at our prior experience, our capacity, and I specifically addressed stakeholder support because you can read in the ESSA task force blueprint that Daryl was so instrumental in bringing to the table, that there's a lot of support for this type of authentic assessment. But I want to just take a moment in this testimony to talk about the difference between authentic assessment and how it really aligns to the goals that we want. If we look at we did a standards-based report card this time instead of for standardized testing. We did it for authentic assessment, and we look at those 6 goals. The exit project that we would try to do at the end of elementary, the end of middle school, and the end of high school. The exit years, because then you're providing real data that goes with the student to the next grade level to help the students get a good start. A standardized test score months later, it doesn't help. So those are the 3 grade levels that we would be targeting. They do a project, 40 hours in self-directed learning. It can be community service that fits the community contributor glow, complex thinking and problem solving, and authentic performance or quality. Then you go to the other 3 Ps. This is listed under the Molokai example. It's a paper, and a portfolio, and a presentation. So the research paper helps with developing critical thinking, especially English language arts, and helps with college readiness. The portfolio can very easily incorporate the personal transition plan materials. The presentation to the community panel helps to demonstrate effective communicator. And then they have to respond to questions to verify their learner. So that's the goals that we want to see are met by the senior project. We train every single high school to have a senior project coordinator. We had conferences. I taught the course to give credit to the senior project coordinators that wanted to study how to do this better. We had an incredible system in place, and then we switched from the elected board to the appointed board, and it went down by the wayside. But it's an amazing amazing thing that Hawaii is ahead of everyone else in the country. I took this to the national level with the American Association of School Librarians. We did a national task force on senior projects. So I've done research on every single state in the country. And Hawaii has a great chance to try to participate in this and make a phenomenal difference in our education system. Thank you for your time. Questions?
Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks, Pat.
Martha Gordon.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. I'm Martha Guinan. I'm the chair of the Special Education Advisory Council. And I'd like to talk to you today about inclusion and also we had two testimonies which you should have in front of you. One is on inclusion and the other is on the ESSA and how it's going to be rolled out. So first of all, I just want to summarize, because you do have the testimony in front of you. And on inclusion, the Special Education Advisory Council strongly prefers least restrictive environment as opposed to inclusion, because inclusion is not as well understood, so it's not done very well. And so the measurement that IDEA requires is the how many students are educated in regular education classrooms for 80% of the day. And that is, that number can be masked by the other kinds of students that are included in this, which is English as a second language, as well as the, as long as they have an IEP, then they are included in this number. So it can be masked, and I think that the national average is 61.2 and Hawaiʻi is 36.8. So we know that it's not a reliable source. Our recommendation is that additional time and effort is invested to ensure that the metrics measure quality as well as quantity to be a more honest assessment. And then the other recommendation is on continuum of alternative placements. We've been hearing about schools that are encouraging their teachers to do all inclusion programs, so they include everyone. And of course, this doesn't pay attention to the needs of the student. It's just to bring your numbers up. So we really recommend that you look at the needs of the student and place them according to that rather than just to bring your numbers up. And then, of course, and then the other thing that I want to really bring up is the Special Education Advisory Council is working on an inclusion vision to clarify and understand better. And we hope this will be, we're almost done with it, and we hope it will be embraced by the board when it is completed. But it does include the Mahopena A'o and various other ideas. And then quickly, the second on the ESSA, the achievement gap mostly is, it was defined as a difference in meeting achievement standards between high need students and English learners. And this again, the numbers can be masked. So the recommendation is that the targets be set for each of the subgroups rather than have them all lumped together in one. And we recommend an N size of 10 rather than 20 because this helps to show growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Corey Rosenlee.
Good morning. A couple things before I begin, actually, just to bring your attention. I do want to report that last week, HSTA had a really good meeting with Tom Saka from the DOE to work specifically on authentic assessments. It's a big project, but I'm hopeful that HSTA, the DOE, and the BOE, if we work together, can really take that innovative idea and be one of those pilot schools. The other thing I wanted to bring attention to the board was a conversation I had this morning. Something that we're talking about inclusion in special education. One of the things that has really suffered because of budget cuts and other things is special education transition coordinators. And unfortunately, too often times when our special education students leave our schools, they don't have the skills of the next step what they need for their lives. And these transition coordinators were working with businesses and these students to help them on their next steps. And unfortunately, this position oftentimes has been cut at the high school level. So just to bring attention to that one. And now for today's testimony. When I saw today's agenda, I was really excited. I'll tell you why. You had two things, both accountability and inclusion, that we really hope that we can have a conversation about next steps and how to improve inclusion. Currently under the accountability system, we have the achievement gap scores that we have on Strive High. And oftentimes that may tell us for Strive High that we have a high achievement gap. But it doesn't tell us the why. So what often happens is that the only variable that if a school gets a poor score on the achievement gap, then the variable that they will fix is time. And time is often not the real reason why students are doing poorly on the achievement gap. Schools will increase the amount of time on the tested subjects in order to try to improve the Strive High scores. But under ESSA, we have an opportunity to look at something very different. Under ESSA, up to 49% of accountability can be used for school quality or student success indicators. So right now we look at the output. How do the kids do on the SBA? But that, again, doesn't tell us the why. What if we switched it and started to look at the inputs? And what that can mean is this. Under ESSA, you can use 7% of Title I funds to improve the bottom 5% of schools. We can use this money to try to improve things, but we have to know where to spend the money. What does an ideal inclusion class look like? First of all, you have low class sizes so that students can get individualized attention. Second, you have two quality teachers, a regular education teacher, the specialist, and the special education teacher who is supposed to work with the inclusion students. At the same time, you also have a low ratio of special education to regular education students. Now, I have seen all sorts of models, and unfortunately, oftentimes due to funding, the perfect model doesn't happen. As one of you members of the board said to me one time, if you don't measure it, people won't care. So what we need to do is measure these things. If we look at the inputs and we measure, first of all, do they have a regular education and a qualified special education teacher in that classroom? That will tell us that, say, for example, a school is doing poorly, then what we need to do is we need to make sure that we incentivize or get the teachers there. That's the first thing. Second of all, how low is the class size? Do they have 40 kids, which I've been seeing in inclusion classes at Campbell, or do they have 25 or 20, which is what they should have? How many special education students are in that class? And if it's 5, then we know that that's the appropriate number. But if it's 15 or 17, which I've seen in a class, then that's not an inclusion class. That's a special education class with some regular education students in it. But if we put this stuff on a new accountability system, and we measure those factors, and a school is one of the bottom 5%, now we have the money to say, look, we need to lower the class size in this class. We need to lower the inclusion kids in that class. Or we need to make sure that they have those 2 qualified teachers. So if we start measuring the inputs for inclusion, then we can get to a place where we can actually start fixing the problem, because we'll know what the problem is, rather than all of a sudden is getting a score without understanding how to fix it. So I know this is a process that will take a lot of time, but I hope this will start a conversation so that when we start looking at the accountability system, we start looking at inputs for across the board and not just outputs.
Thank you, Clay.
Thank you.
There are no more testifiers.
there's no more public testimony, we will move on the approval of the minutes.
Make a statement?
Sure, excuse me, Hubert, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to thank the teachers for coming as far as you have and putting the time and effort in for our kids. I want to let you know that this board, as far as I'm concerned, I can relate a lot to you. The sound of learning in a classroom is not quiet kids sitting down trying to pass a test. I think learning for teachers is a gift that they themselves understand that there's 9 ways to skin a cat, and when you look at a student, the good teachers right away know what the student is lacking, what he needs. And by testing, I think all we've done is dumb down our system. So I would definitely like to see this year the assessment portion and these things be brought up to the board as a priority. I only look at tests as a measurement of your system. Okay? I don't look at it as an indicator of the students themselves. At the same time, I don't think any student wants to be a bad student. I mean, when I ask my students, and if any teacher asks their students, why do you get grades? Why do you get grades? It takes them 25 minutes to get the real answer. And the real answer is, I don't want to get busted, Mr. I want that trip to Disneyland. And so what we've done is we've boiled down learning into an extrinsic motivator, not an intrinsic motivator. We got to get back to that. We got to get the joy of learning back into our classrooms. And I intend, and I hope the board intends to make it a very big priority this year. Thank you.
Does any other board member have any comments to make? And I do want to express my appreciation in behalf of the board for all of the testimony, because this is a very serious issue for all of us. And like Hubert, I think this has to be a priority for us in the future. It should be a priority now. Thank you. On with the minutes. Approval for the minutes. Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Thank you. We'll now move on to the presentation of discussion items, starting with the presentation on special education inclusion in the Department of Education. I would like to call on Suzanne Mulcahy, Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Curriculum Instruction and Student Support, to present on this agenda item. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning. As Vice Chair Bergen said, I am Suzanne Mulcahy. I'm following your directions for the listeners. Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Curriculum Instruction and Student Support, otherwise known as OSIS. And with me I have Director Debbie Farmer. She is the Director of the Exceptional Support Branch. That is probably a new name that some of you will remember has been put into play due to the reorganization of the office. As a teacher who taught special education students in many settings, including inclusion setting, and as a regular education teacher and special education teacher, middle school principal who supported and implemented full inclusion at a middle school for all students, I'm pleased to present to you today. I believe in inclusion, and I've seen the results. Students who are in effective inclusion settings learn more when they're taught alongside their regular education peers. This is true for special education students who are in an inclusion setting, and it is true for English learners or Title I students who are in inclusive settings. Inclusion works. It's considered best practice. It's also one of the most difficult assignments I ever had as a regular education teacher and as a special education teacher. It is not enough to simply say, we're going to have inclusive practices. We're going to implement inclusion. Teachers need time to work with their colleagues. Teachers might need professional development. Principals need to understand what it is to create a master schedule that allows for those things. And so I am here before you, I think maybe the third, possibly the fourth time, talking about inclusion in 19 months. Because I think inclusion is difficult, there are a lot of questions around inclusion, and because it is now in our strategic plan that we will focus on inclusive settings for all of our kids. So I apologize ahead of time if some of the things that I say are repeat information for some of you. Hopefully there will be a nugget in this presentation that you can learn that maybe you didn't pick up previously. It's not the exact one, but it probably isn't the last one. Okay? So inclusive practices are academic and behavior supports and strategies provided to students with disabilities in a general education setting. When we use the word inclusion, we're generally referring to including special education students in a regular ed or general education setting with peers who don't have an IEP. Sometimes we use the term inclusive setting or inclusive education. And this is usually when we're referring to including students who historically have been pulled out of the classroom setting into a smaller class size, rather than pushing in the adults who would provide support for them. The adults come in to provide instruction alongside regular ed peers with differentiation and scaffolding to support them. If you consider an English learner, while they may spend a small percentage of time in a smaller setting, which is supported by the federal law, they probably won't learn English if they're always in another setting with other students who don't speak English. In addition, they probably won't experience robust academic vocabulary critical to their growth, their learning, and ultimately their achievement. So, inclusive practices, which does include special education inclusion, is an approach to teaching everyone that enables all students to access the course content and fully participate in the learning activities to demonstrate their knowledge. So we've talked a lot about what inclusion is over the past year and a half, and I want to point out what it isn't. It is not sacrificing the needs of the general education classmates. In fact, we've talked a lot about the fact that it's important for general education students to get to know and develop relationships with special education peers. They become the village that takes care of that student once the student graduates and is living on their own, especially since it is more likely than not that that student's parents will pass away before that student. It is the village that surrounds them because of the relationships, because of time spent in class, because of time spent in social activities at school that allows that to happen. It is not simply taking special education students and placing them in a regular education classroom and, hoping the teacher figures it out. It takes coordinated effort and conversations and articulation and training to make it happen. It is not watering down the curriculum. It's using instructional practices and strategies so that the special education student can access that curriculum commensurate with their regular ed peers. Now, inclusion is not simply something that Assistant Superintendent Mulcahy is fond of or experienced and thinks we need to do. It is not something that the Special Education Advisory Council is particularly interested in. It's because there are federal law, state law, and board policy that support it as well. So the DOE believes that inclusive practices are best for our students. It's included in our strategic plan and that we will support inclusion and inclusive practices. The IDEA states that students with disabilities must have access to the general education curriculum and to the maximum extent appropriate. Children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, should be educated with children who are non-disabled. Special classes or separate schools or removing students from the general ed class should only occur when a student's learning or attention issue, their disability, is so severe that supplementary aids and services can't provide them with an appropriate education. And as our chair of SAC, Martha Guinan, pointed out, it's the least restrictive environment, which is based on student need and determined by the IEP team, that will tell us whether the student will be in an inclusive setting or another setting. The IDEA is supportive of inclusion for several reasons. They must be provided the opportunity to make progress. We're trying to catch them up, keep them up, and move them ahead all at the same time. That is not an easy task for a teacher. It is not an easy task for a student. It is done easier in a regular ed setting. I will never forget having a resource classroom, which means that children left their regular ed classroom and came to my room. And I really felt that one of my students was absolutely at the top of the grade level. And I made arrangements for that student to transition back into a regular ed classroom. So I took the student with me so that he could see that it wasn't going to be as horrible as he thought, and that he would know people there and feel comfortable. And when I got there, I realized that what I thought was really wonderful accomplishment was in getting him caught up in filling in the holes that he had. However, I had not helped to keep that student up to the point where he could transition into the class. So I had to change my teaching. I had to say, if I'm going to have regular ed or special ed kids in a resource room, I'm going to need to go in and out of that room every once in a while to make sure that I'm not just catching them up, but I'm helping them to keep up and helping them to move ahead. Chapter 60 in our Hawaii Administrative Rules also talks about we need to consider least restrictive environment, and we need to place them in the least restrictive environment, which would be the regular ed classroom with supplementary aids and services as appropriate. And of course, Board of Ed Policy 10513 on inclusion states that the Board of Ed believes all students can and want to learn, and it's best to have them in an inclusive setting. The Hawaii Department of Education also has the same expectations for all students, including the standards. We do not have alternate standards for special education students. So inclusive practices help to support the Common Core standards because they promote rigorous instruction, they provide varied learning opportunities, and they provide opportunities for building peer relationships. And I want you to take note that I'm talking about the standards. I am not talking about the curricula utilized, the textbook. I'm talking about the instructional shifts that have happened with Common Core to increase the rigor of education. Chair Guinan also shared something that is very alarming to SEAC, to the department, and it's one of the reasons that we're focusing on inclusion and inclusive practices, and that is that nationally the least restrictive environment average is 61.2%, so Martha got that correct. In Hawaii, we are at 36.8%. So you can see that we are very, very low compared to the national average. And in fact, I believe we might be number 48 or 49 out of the 50 states. It has been increasing, but we are still at 36.8. The goal of inclusive practices is to improve student outcomes. And the reasons that we do this is because we want to show that we have high expectations for all students, including students that have an IEP or students that are learning another language. We want all students to have access to the grade level curriculum. We want them to be able to receive individualized attention, which does not necessarily mean in another room. We want them to have increased self-confidence, a positive attitude, and ultimately better post-school outcomes. Research shows that when you educate special ed students in a general ed classroom, they do have better post-secondary outcomes. They have higher scores on standardized tests of reading and math. That may not be the state assessment. We have other standardized tests that are given to students. They have fewer absences and fewer referrals for disruptive behavior. All of these results were regardless of disability label or eligibility, the severity of their disability, their gender, or the family's economic status. So the question is, what are we going to do in Hawaii? Quite frankly, we've been talking about inclusion in Hawaii for the past 20 years since I got here. It had been implemented at some schools in Pearl City. I'm not saying it wasn't in others, it's just that I happen to be in Pearl City. And by now you would think that we really got it and we were implementing. We've done trainings on differentiation and scaffolding. We've talked about inclusion. Some people hear us say inclusion and they think same song 10th verse, same song 11th verse. The reality is if we were all to get in a van and go visit some schools across the state, we may not see that inclusion was being implemented consistently in all schools across the state. And Member Brian DeLima and I have talked about this quite a bit, and we have also discussed this in the Special Ed Advisory Council. And if I could say, I'm grateful that SAC is helping to develop a definition of inclusion and that we are working together on addressing this issue. So there are different service delivery models. I'm going to quickly go through them because to tell you the truth, I could do a 3-day seminar on inclusion and still not have enough time. So I'll be brief, but there are different delivery models and it's up to the principal and the school based on the needs of the students that year to determine how they are going to implement inclusion. Presently at Kailua Intermediate, Principal Lisa DeLong has implemented the co-teaching model. Prior to that, when I was there, it was up to each team to decide which model they were going to use based on the expertise, the comfort level of teachers, and the trust factor between a content expert and a pedagogical expert or a strategy expert, which is what special education teachers are seen as. So we can do co-teaching. 2 teachers come together, they plan together, they take turns teaching. They might split up groups and do flexible ability grouping, but it takes 2 teachers and maybe other personnel in the classroom to make that work. Very important, as Chair Cox has pointed out, that you have time for these teachers to meet and to plan together and to talk about who's going to do which part and who has expertise in what and how the students are going to be supported. There are different approaches to co-teaching. Sometimes one teaches while the other observes and does intervention with students. Sometimes one teaches and the other one assists as needed. They might assist up in the front, they might assist with the students. So they really have to be a well-oiled pair of teachers working together. It could be that they have parallel teaching, so 2 teachers are teaching the same things with different groups, so the kids can have more opportunity to ask questions, to work things out. It could be that they do station teaching, like centers where they rotate through. There are also consultative models. And that would mean that the special education teacher consults with the regular ed teacher to help explain what the needs of those students in the classroom are and how to best meet those needs. They would help to design the specially designed instruction required for those students to be successful and learn in that classroom. And quite often, it isn't just the teacher who goes in to check and make sure that that is happening and provide support. It might be an educational assistant who comes in to help in that classroom as well. The consultant model provides guidance to the general ed teacher, adapts the lessons, modifies the materials, identifies recommendations and strategies to use based on their instructional strategy or pedagogy knowledge. They might provide specially designed instruction, and they may give alternative assessments. I think that if we were to go to schools and talk to teachers about inclusion, they would be able to give this presentation. I believe that most of them understand what inclusion is. Many of them have experienced it. But teachers have also shared, as principals have, that they really need more professional development. They need to understand the different models. Principals need to understand how to create a schedule that will support and allow the articulation time to take place. And so my office has developed an RFP which will be to deliver very robust professional development over the next 2 years for all complex areas based on the needs determined by our complex area superintendents. I cannot say what Hawaii Island needs or what Keone Korea's CAS in one area needs versus Art Souza. I know that CASs and principals have done training on inclusion, but I know that some of them would like more to be done. And so we are creating an opportunity for CASs to take advantage of very robust, ongoing, not one and done professional development over a 2-year process where they'll come in and learn and be able to go and practice and then come back together again and learn some more and share what's happening ongoing, with the principals sitting alongside teachers and with principals having their own training so that they can understand what it is they're trying to create at their school if they need that. In addition, it will help identify additional resources that might be needed. We have worked on our methodology, and in a couple months we are sharing that methodology with you once we're done getting input from others. But we want an opportunity to have professional development uniquely tailored to the needs of a complex area or schools. I'm not going to tell them who's going to come. I'm not going to mandate it. I'm going to trust the leadership of the complex area superintendents. However, I will do everything possible to follow the RFP process and make sure that we have somebody that we trust, that has a track record of helping schools to improve inclusion, so that we can get past these. So what are we doing about inclusion? It's time to move on. It's time to start becoming models of inclusion. And in the process, our students will make greater progress. In closing, I want to add this. Rigorous instruction is just as important as inclusive practices. So I cannot take some students and put them in a classroom with 2 teachers and consider it done. It's important that whether you're in a general ed setting, whether you're pulled out in a resource setting, we have rigorous instruction. Innovative instruction, thinking outside of the box, getting kids active and involved, pulling out each strategy until you find the one that works with that student and using it until it's time for the next. It's important, and Martha pointed this out, that students with disabilities may need to be in another setting. The reason that the I in IEP stands for individualized is because it's about that particular student and what their needs are. So we have to be careful that we don't just say, everyone's doing inclusion, and we don't provide those other opportunities for kids who need a different setting. But we're always working towards getting them back into the regular education class with their regular ed peers. Questions?
I have a question for you. Actually, I was going to ask you to what you attributed the low rate of inclusion in Hawaii, but then you talked about professional development and the need for rigorous. Are you saying that these strategies will improve, or you're hoping that they're going to improve the rate
I
of
believe that
inclusion?
I believe that this particular strategy, the PB, will help. It will not be the only thing.
Other board members, questions? Hubert?
Can you get me into the 40s, the 40 percentiles? We're at 36 now.
Into the
Okay.
40s.
I mean, no, basically,
I get it now.
Well, I'm saying that's a goal, okay? Because, you know, in terms of special ed, I think the best thing you're doing, and I applaud you for that, is to understand that we can't take just different systems and form it on.
That's right.
You have to take what the root causes and the problems that each community has. So I'm very, very glad you recognize that. My question is, when you look at inclusion, and you said, well, we go to different areas and we see different types of inclusion. Sometimes that's not bad though, right? Because in reference to what you just said, sometimes inclusion is different in Kona than it is in Kauai per se.
That's correct, as long as they're
Right.
implementing inclusion. But if we go and they're not implementing inclusion, that's a problem for me.
Okay, so what I'm saying is keep the definition of inclusion a little flexible.
Oh, yes, it is. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of different types of inclusion. Now, one area that I don't see you have in terms of co-teaching that you may want to look at, because I found this to be tremendously helpful. Students teach. I took my brightest student and worked with the special ed teacher, and she actually mentored that student on the side. And I think that's really, really powerful, because the most important thing about inclusion, and Mr. DeLima knows this as a parent, is the relationship that you have with normal students. And what I found out from the federal government is, bless their soul, they wanted to mainstream everybody. It's great. What I found personally was that the community and the public wasn't ready to accept them. So I think that's really important to understand also. But you got a big task in front of you. Get us into the 40s. I'll support you all the way. I like what you're saying about trying different things, do ESSAs. Try different things, so at least you can come back and say, we tried this, it didn't work, we seem to be moving in this direction. But go for it, I'll support you all the way. Thank you.
Mr. Chen?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question, Ms. Mulcahy, concerning your reference to what inclusion is not. And you mentioned specifically a question that I think comes up for a lot of us who are non-educators.
Yes.
You said inclusion is not watering down the curriculum. So as a non-educator, I'm just curious, is it a normal practice to adjust the way the students are evaluated, or how grades are, how testing occurs within the inclusion setting? How does that work?
So, yeah, I think it starts with the teaching process, the instructional process. So we can differentiate based on the needs of the students, and that would include other students, not simply special ed kids. It could be disadvantaged students in a Title I program, English learners, others. So first of all, we differentiate and we build scaffolds. We help give tools that will help them to access the curriculum that maybe the person sitting next to them doesn't need. We take the opportunity to fill in the places where they are weak and then get them right back in with the rest of the group. And that comes and goes. You can be an honors student in math and still have to come over and have a little extra help in percentages, and Hawaii percentages and decimals and fractions are the same thing. It happens, okay? It could be that the way you find out what students know is different. It could be that a student tells me the answers instead of writing the answers. Because if they understand the science curricula or the social studies concept, but they can't write it down, then when I get those results, I might be giving them a grade based on their writing ability when they could sit and talk all day about what they know about that science, the concepts on the science test, or